Lei Homa, I'm Wil Yeung from YoungMenCooking.com. Welcome to the channel where you can cook with confidence. Now today we're actually not cooking anything, and I'm so thrilled to have you joining in today's episode. A little while ago I started working on a project in addition to filming regularly for the YouTube show, and that project is a second cookbook. Now this second cookbook is going to be packed with super easy to make recipes, plus of course all your favorites from the show. The second cookbook is slated to be ready for around March to April, but I'll definitely announce it here on the show so that way you'll be the first to know. In today's episode, you can come with me on a short little tour of what's been happening behind the scenes. Hey there, so second cookbook. Really exciting. I'm here to show you a little bit behind the scenes of what's going on and what I've been working on besides filming regular content for the YouTube channel. Most of you know that I actually work as a professional photographer and videographer, so this is what's been going on behind the scenes. I hope you'll find this enjoyable, entertaining, and a little bit interesting. Here we go. So right now I'm just prepping to make the garlic chili pasta. So some spaghetti, just boiling some water here. And of course this is a garlic chili spaghetti recipe, so lots of garlic and lots of basil. Absolutely love basil, and we'll also use some of these. We'll pick out the nice ones for props when it's time to take the photos. This is the chili oil that we have ready. Water is just about ready. Let's get cooking. Alright, so the garlic is all chopped and ready to go. The pasta is boiling, still have 8 minutes on it. I like to use my oven as a timer. And I'm just going to pick out some of this basil here. So I'm looking for one that looks really nice, maybe one or two that looks really nice. We're going to use this for staging when we go and take the photographs. I think I like these two here. That's plenty. I'll add a lot of green color. So this recipe is fairly simple and not really that involved. Most of it is just waiting for the water to boil. So during that time, I can pick out the nice basil for the photographs. I can also choose some garlic. I have some garlic that I'll show you in a second that adds a lot of color. I'm very particular when I go to the store and choose out ingredients that will be used in the photograph, and just start to really envision and visualize what I think would look really nice when we go and stage and plate everything to photograph. This garlic here, I purposely chose these ones because they have this just really beautiful purple color. It's going to add a lot of depth and color into the photograph. So this plate here will have some whole ones, some broken off ones. We may use them, may not sure. And of course this is our basil here that we've chosen out, a bright green color. Then just gotta grab some of this dried chili right here. So I'm just going to remove some of the seeds here. I'm going to be using this in the recipe, and then we'll choose some that we'll use for the photographs. We'll choose some really nice dark, deep dark red ones. Alright, so I've chosen some really kind of ruby red, nice looking, maybe not so much this one here. That'll be for the photographs as well. And the pasta is just about done, so gotta heat up the frying pan and get this going. All the ingredients ready. Got my non-stick carbon steel pan, and just gonna start that off on medium heat. I'm just gonna give that about 2 minutes to warm up. I suppose I could have been warming this up while the pasta was cooking, but that's all right. I'm just gonna add in some of this really smoky, I absolutely love it, chili oil. This is what's going to give it that really nice smoky chili flavor, hence the chili garlic noodles. So pretty generous with it. And then before we put the garlic in, we're going to turn the heat back down to medium-low. So the heat is turned down to medium-low. This way we don't burn the garlic right away. Going to let that infuse. Look at that. That smells absolutely delicious. Amazing. Let that cook for about a minute or two. We'll add in the chilies. Actually, I'll just add in the chilies now. All right, so now we're going to turn the heat back up to medium. Get ready for the noodles. Gonna put the noodles in, followed by some soy sauce. And that's basically it. Cook that for a few minutes, and then we're going to add the basil, but then turn the heat off because the basil will wilt really quickly. So add the basil, give it a few stirs, and basically that is it. Man, I just love it. That sizzle, the smell, just so fragrant. Wait until we add the basil. So just cook this for a few minutes and it's basically done. I absolutely, this is not sponsored, but I absolutely love this carbon steel pan. I've been using it a lot. And you can see that actually, if you take care of it well enough, and of course, check out that previous episode I filmed on how to properly season really easily your non-stick, or give a non-stick coating to your carbon steel pan. Just look at how non-stick this is, cooking pasta. That is just amazing. I can't believe how non-stick this is. Really, really crazy. All right, so that's about good enough. Gonna add the basil. First, turn the heat off. Gonna add this basil here. Just gonna leave the basil whole, so it's gonna wilt. Beautiful, look at that color. Just stir that around, and you're good to go. Man, that smells so fragrant. Bad part is, I can't actually even eat this because we have to photograph this first. So let's choose out a plate and some other props. I'll explain as we go. I have a bunch of different props here, but I think what I'll actually use is this plate here. I think it's gonna look really nice. This plate here is from one of my favorite stores. I get a lot of these props from Crate and Barrel. And I really like the ones that are made in Portugal because they're handmade and they've got an incredible heft to them. Just really, really beautiful. I love the kind of that soft glaze they put on this. So this is the one I'm choosing for this particular recipe. So let's see if I can do this one-handed here. Nice. Now we have to think about props and staging, but before we do that, actually, we're just going to make this dish look a little bit more presentable. It should still look rustic, as if you just kind of threw it on the plate, but it's still magical how it still just looks really restaurant style, right out of a magazine type of thing. So we're just going to fix that up a little bit, and this is how I do it. Use a pair of chopsticks. Could use tweezers or whatnot. Now I just want to have some of these kind of red, little pops of red color, but the noodles still should look natural. So I don't want to touch the noodles a little bit too much there. Some basil here. And the basil should also look fairly natural. Maybe another pop of red here. There we go. Not too bad. Luckily for me, this dish is sort of meant to look very just rustic and natural and kind of a natural beauty. So that looks pretty good. But before we do anything else, just going to wipe the plate a little here. Great, there we go. Right now, so I'm just collecting different props that I think would work well with the photograph. And I'm basically just looking for things that kind of matches the color, or, well, it doesn't always have to match the color, but stuff with texture and just adds depth and dimension and stuff like this. You know, little wooden, has that nice grain, the leading lines. And then of course, just to give it a little bit of narrative, I have a fork, and these are just kind of some cloth placemats that will add some texture and dimension, a little bit of color as well. And we'll kind of go from there. So let's take these into the little makeshift studio. So this is the little makeshift studio that I have here, and I'll kind of explain what's going on because it definitely looks like a mess, but I promise it is organized chaos. So these are kind of like the backdrops. Most of them are made by just putting wood together, literally, just gluing the wood. You can see the back of this here. So there's that. Some of these are just some different textiles and textures. Got some slate boards here. These are actually countertop decals or backsplash decals. And of course got some foam board here, and got like a marble serving board here. And this is basically just flooring, and some of this looks really nice. And the one that I think I'm going to use actually looks very almost like concrete. It gives it this industrial look. It's really, really nice. So I'm going to take this off, clean this off, and then we'll come right back. Man, it smells so good in here. I just want to eat. Before we get started, let me explain some of this geeky camera gear here. So this is what I'm shooting on here. It's a D750, pretty old camera, but has a really high resolution for images. Absolutely amazing camera. and I'm shooting on the 24 to 70 millimeter. And this little guy here is an Ellen Chrome trigger for the studio lighting that I have set up. So what I've done here, this is the backdrop here. Looks almost kind of like concrete, and once we start photographing, we can make this look even more amazing. Now, the thing about photography that I absolutely love, and it kind of comes with experience, is lighting. That is really the core of photography. And once you understand the language of light, you really start painting with it and creating sort of a narrative with that light and shaping it. And I'll kind of show you once we start taking the pictures. But this is the studio light that I'm using today. Awesome. So before we do anything, we're going to start staging the props and the dish. This is actually, just got to say, this is actually not traditionally how food photography is done. Food photography is normally, if you're working with a big budget, big studio, they usually have the photographer, they usually have the art director, they also have the food stylist whose job, usually it's not the photographer's job to stage, and literally the photographer only does lighting and actually taking the photograph, of course. But the staging and all that kind of stuff is usually up to the food stylist. And of course, usually they'll have a chef that will be there to make the actual food. And they may have to make the dish several times or several versions of the dish. So what I'm thinking of doing is having these placemats here create some sort of shape, some sort of line, some sort of texture. And of course, there's no real right or wrong. This is just kind of, you play with it as you go, change things as you go. I have absolutely no idea if it's going to look good or not. I just kind of have a little bit of a vision in my head. And then we just kind of go from there. Put this here for a little bit of texture. And of course, we have fork. Put it there. We have these peppers here. Let's just put it here for now. It may look good, may not. I'm not sure. And this basil we'll just put here. Of course, garlic. Love this purple color on the garlic. Maybe I'll put one. I'll just put it here. We'll see how that looks there. And of course, we have some garlic that's opened here. Of course, what I'm trying to look for right here is just things looking somewhat natural. So, of course, like I said before, there's no real rule. It's more of just guidelines. So if you have, say, 2 garlic, it just looks too in line, then it kind of looks a little awkward. So it needs to kind of look a little bit off to the side here. We'll just kind of see how that goes. It may have to change it, but that should look all right. Just want to show a little bit of that purple. There we go. And that looks pretty good. Maybe we'll put this stem on the bottom here. There we go. And we'll see how this works out. So the light is coming from this direction here. And what I've actually done, terrible, but I mean very creative. I've just taken a garbage bag just to hide a little bit of that light because I really, really want to narrow the beam of this light, like really narrow. So I basically blocked off 2/3 of this softbox. And what the softbox does is literally just softens the light that is inside. So there's actually a flash head in here. You'll see it there. There we go. And it's quite a powerful light. And of course the output can be controlled on the back of this control panel here, or conveniently enough on my actual trigger. And this is the trigger that will wirelessly communicate with this softbox here. And depending on the output that I want, it's going to light the area. But before we do that, we're actually going to turn on something called a modeling lamp. And that is right here. Turn this on here. And that just turns on this light here. And this is basically for, it helps, it does several things, but in my case, it will help me, or help my camera rather, grab the focus really well in the actual spot that I want to focus. But before we do anything else, we're going to turn all the lights off except for this. And the reason for that is because the light in this room is very kind of orangey. You can kind of see it bouncing off of this board here, or even this fork. You can see that it's very golden, very orangey, because it's incandescent light. It's a very warm light. And this one here is not. So we don't want to kind of mess around with that color temperature. This is the part I love. After you stage everything, I mean, right there, it looks okay, but once you turn the lights off, it just suddenly looks dramatic. Just check this out. So this before. All right, I guess you can't really see it. You will see it in the photos, I promise. The camera is going to be shooting from this direction here, and then the light will come from this direction, and you're going to get this amazing dramatic look. And you see how, because the light is coming from that direction, it's almost sort of backlit, and you can tell from the little shiny spots on the peppers that's reflecting off of the oil. And same with the peppers here, those are called highlights, and that's going to add that extra layer, that depth, and that really nice kind of element to it. So let's get started with taking the pictures. Just a starting point, and that's kind of, I suppose, a misconception with photography, is that every picture that you take doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. You just need some sort of starting point, and then you kind of build it from there. So this is kind of our starting point here, and I'll show you kind of on the screen there. Not too bad, but it does look a little bit dark on the left side there. I would like to see a little bit more light coming from that direction. So what I'm going to do is increase the power output from this flash here. And I'm just going to increase it a little bit. And then we're just going to dump the light so that it resets. And then we're good to go. Try taking another picture here. And the thing I love about photography, it's very much like cooking when I think about it. You kind of just start with a dish, and then you kind of add these different layers, these different ingredients, and they add different flavors and different looks and different narratives to your overall picture. So the last thing I do have to keep in mind when I'm taking the photos is that there's going to be a little bit of a crop when I send the photos to the printer or to the pre-press. So I just have to keep in mind my framing has to be a little bit bigger, or a little bit, there's going to be a little bit more room on the top and the bottom, and I can kind of, a little bit of flexibility there. I just have to keep that in mind. Yes, we get to eat. It smells amazing, but I'm sure it's cold by now. That is so flavorful. Man, that's so good. Just the combination of the fragrance or from that aromatic basil and the chili peppers. Get that little spiciness. Just, man, that is good. Man. So flavorful. So that actually went really well. And normally I would actually just start with the plate and then I'll add in the placemats, I'll add in the ingredients as we go, as we take the pictures. But I'm actually pretty happy with that one. I sort of had a vision in mind and just set it up. A couple of things that we tweaked, and that was pretty good. That was it. And that is basically one picture, but now onto the editing. All right, so we're just going to transfer those photos into a program called Lightroom, and then we're going to transfer those into Photoshop. So those two programs do similar things, but they're very different. Lightroom will be able to edit sort of the lighting and the dynamic range of the image, and then we'll transfer that into Photoshop, which we'll put into the correct sizing format for pre-press. All right, so this is Lightroom here, and these are the photos that we're importing. So now that they've imported, this is my Wil Yeung photography logo. And we're going to go to develop. And then you can choose the different pictures here. But I know I like the second last one here. So just gonna flip this left. And basically we can start editing. Now I already have somewhat of an idea of what I usually like to do. I like to increase the clarity a little bit. That just really brings out that darkness, and going to increase the vibrance here a little bit and the saturation, and that just really increases the vibrance of the color and just makes it really nice and beautiful. Beautifies it. And then we're going to increase the sharpening here to about 80%. Remove chromatic aberration, and the sharpness just really accentuates essentially the sharpness of the image. Going to take a look here, and then the photo itself actually looks pretty good. So we have a really strong photo to work with, but I'm just going to increase a little bit of the exposure here on the left side of the dish. And I'm just going to paint a little bit with this brush, and then I'm going to increase the exposure, maybe just 3 clicks here, and then a little bit on the shadows, and that's it. And the left side, or the right side, sorry, going to increase the shadows here a little bit as well, maybe about 20% here or so. Maybe a little bit less. Really like having that contrast between the shadows and the brightness. That's kind of how you get that really nice depth of field, or not depth of field, the definition, sorry. And really gives it a nice narrative. So this is going to get, I know either the top or the bottom will get cut off a little bit as we import this into Photoshop, but I'm just going to add a little bit of a vignette here. So I'm painting around the corners. I'm just going to lower the brightness, and it really accentuates just that brightness, that beam of light that we were talking about when we were taking the photo. Really accentuates that. And this looks actually pretty good. Maybe I'll just paint on that fork there. Increase the shadows a little bit. Increase the brightness a little bit. But that's about it. This looks pretty good to me. Definitely also don't want to over edit something and then it just looks really unnatural. But this looks quite nice. So kind of like in some cooking where you have your salty, the sweets, the spicy, and together it kind of creates this really amazing explosion of flavor. Really like the same in photography. And you have something called the highlights, which I mentioned, which are these kind of bright spots that you see reflecting off of where that directional light is. So you have these bright spots here, and that creates something called highlights. And then you have these shadows here on the opposite side of the highlights. And that, in contrast, creates that definition. Same with here on the left side of the plate. You see how there's some highlights. It's brighter on the left side than the right side. It gives it that texture, that definition, and that dynamic range. So you can see this dish in not only in shadow, but also in brightness, essentially. And it just gives it that really, really nice dramatic look. So if anything, if I was to really nitpick, I could clone out some little spots like this. Like so. Maybe just clean this up here a little bit as well. But that's if I'm being super, super picky. But other than that, it looks pretty good. So we can go export this. And then we'll return in Photoshop. Okay, so this is Photoshop here. And this picture is actually a picture from the vegan ramen cookbook. And we're going to use that as a template for the sizing. And we're going to copy and paste this. I'm just going to scale this down because it's a very large image. And like I said, the picture will be cut off a little bit, either from the top or the bottom, but we can decide. And when I was taking the picture, I had that in mind, so going to decide whether I like, I like having the garlic in there. I think something like this would be what I'm looking for. There, I think that looks pretty good. This way you don't have too much of the garlic, but you do have enough that you can see the really delicious purple garlic. And then you can see this really luscious red, ruby red chili peppers and this beautiful bright green basil. I think it looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. So that's basically the general process, at least for up till pre-press. And after getting the photos all done, then you just write the recipe out in Word and just have a Word document, which I kind of found the hard way. When we were working on the first book, I'm not very proficient in Word, so I actually wrote every single recipe, the text pages, every single recipe in Photoshop. I don't know why. I'm just more comfortable and proficient with using Photoshop because naturally I'm a photographer. And I found out afterwards from my pre-press contact that I had to literally rewrite all of the recipes because the Photoshop files it didn't print properly. Something with the the Kodak or something that just didn't work out right, and definitely learned from that experience. And so you live and learn, and this way you won't have to make that same mistake or overcome that same objection the second time. So basically that is it. I hope you found today's episode entertaining and a little interesting. The book is slated to be ready for March or April, but I'll definitely let you know here so you'll be first to know. And of course, as always, remember to subscribe, hit that notification bell so you won't miss a single episode.